you.
I'm going to learn to do what to do with that little thing. There we go. We're okay.
Yeah, that is good.
Donald Trump, by refusing to give us his tax returns, is misleading the American people. And that is a gross understatement. Trump is afraid of letting us see his tax returns for obvious reasons. What he has not done with charities, his financial boondoggles, his financial ripoffs, for example, in Atlantic City. For decades, every presidential candidate has released their full tax returns. The only one that was an exception to that was Mitt Romney, who gave us part of his. And he did it a year ago yesterday. But not Trump. He's breaking all tradition. This is something that goes back many, many decades. Despite his many ties to foreign governments, we need to know what business dealings he's had with foreign governments. His tax returns would show at least part of that. Why has he not released his tax returns? Because it's obvious he's been ethically compromised in most everything he's ever done. According to the Post, Washington Post, Trump paid no federal taxes for at least 5 years. And we already know he's taken hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks. In fact, it's about $900 million in tax breaks alone. He is a welfare king. He's king of the welfare kings. A freeloader has made his way in life by feeding off other people's hard work. Now he's terrified the American people will find out the truth about Donald Trump. This week, Republicans backed Trump's deception when they blocked Senator Wyden's tax returns bill. And that's what they're doing, backing his deception. It's a kind of basic good government policy we should all be able to agree. But Republicans refuse to apply basic standards of decency to their swindler-in-chief. The American people deserve and expect that any candidate to be a leader of the free world must be transparent about everything, but especially their personal finances. But Trump won't do it because he doesn't respect the office he's seeking, the American people. We're going to hear from a number of my senator friends. We're going to first hear from Senator Murphy, Senator Wyden, Stabenow, and Cardin, and we'll take a few questions if we're still around to do it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader. Let me just add some very brief remarks. Last week, the TV news cameras carried a 45-minute infomercial for the new Trump Hotel here in Washington, D.C. Trump said he was going to talk about veterans, but instead he spent a good deal of the time talking about why his hotel was so great and essentially advertising it to the public who were tuning in. It's been clear from the beginning that one of the primary motivations for Donald Trump running for president is to enrich himself, is to make him and his family wealthier. And so it stands to reason that one of the reasons that he is withholding his tax returns is because it would show that he will be just as compromised, just as personally financially motivated as president. The fundamental question here is, why is Donald Trump running for president? His tax returns may show that he is running in order to enrich himself. Why? Because it's likely those tax returns will show major income for Trump and his family from Russia, from Russian business interests, from Russian oligarchs. It will show that the decisions he will make on whether to turn on or off sanctions against Russia could have a multi-million-dollar impact on his net wealth. And so I think it's likely that these tax returns show that he's paid no taxes or very few taxes. That would be embarrassing. But if it shows that his foreign policy positions, in particular the bizarre positions he's taken with respect to U.S.-Russia policy, are a means to enrich himself, then that's not embarrassing, that's disqualifying. And so there's a reason why we have had a tradition of every president showing the American people their tax returns. Because it is a way for the American people to vet the rationale for each candidate's presidency. We don't know the rationale for Donald Trump's candidacy. It may be to try to change U.S. foreign policy in order to make himself and his family richer. We're going to be here next week. We're going to probably have some downtime as we wait for the veto to ripen and for the time to run on the continuing resolution. There's no reason why we couldn't vote on Senator Wyden's piece of legislation next week. Republicans have said they think that Donald Trump should release his tax returns. He's made it clear he won't. And so we collectively, in a bipartisan way, can make sure that this tradition is upheld. There is still time to get this done for the American people. And I thank Senator Wyden for his steadfast leadership. By the way before the fall election campaign began, when he introduced this bill earlier this year. Thank him for his leadership on this issue.
Ron?
Thank you, Senator Murphy, Leader Reid, and you have three of us from the Senate Finance Committee here today, all of whom want to talk about
Oh, no, you got on the committee, all three of you.
I vaguely remember who appointed us. I just think that comes to mind.
Yeah.
The Presidential Tax Transparency Act legislation obviously is a matter that we are concerned about in the Finance Committee. And the first point is how this legislation relates to the presidential debates that will be starting in just 4 days. Our country is just a few days away from one of the most consequential political debates in decades. And it now appears that a 40-year bipartisan good government tradition looks like it's going to be thrown in the garbage can. When the candidates step on the stage on Monday, one of them will have spent months ducking, bobbing, and weaving to avoid disclosing their tax returns, as every single Democrat and Republican has done since Watergate. Come Monday, voters in America ought to have some key information about the nominees. One, do candidates even pay taxes? Two, do both candidates honor the letter and the spirit of our tax laws on charities? And three, does either candidate have a conflict of interest with respect to foreign investments or holdings? Americans have been able to see in black and white Secretary Clinton's answers to those specific questions. They don't have any answers from her opponent, even though when Mitt Romney ran 4 years ago, Mr. Trump prominently spoke about the importance of Mr. Romney releasing his returns. Point number two has to do with the foundation and some comments recently made by Mr. Trump. One of the things we heard a few days ago was how great it was to be able to spend other people's money. When your taxpayer-subsidized foundation pays for your personal items and business costs, it is a lot worse than spending other people's money. It quickly starts to look like an illegal, self-dealing slush fund. These details made it into the light of day because they are part of the Trump Foundation's public filings. The bottom line is that public filings show facts. Not a lot of deception, not boasting, not spin, and the same goes for a tax return. If you want to prove that you're making charitable donations with your own money and not re-gifting somebody else's, like a fruitcake over the holidays, you release your tax returns. It's the way to do it. Let me close by way of saying that I think this parade of excuses for hiding tax returns has to end. At one point, it was about the audit. Then it was that the returns would just be too complicated for anybody to understand. It was said recently that voters would ask too many questions and it would distract from the campaign. So you have what amounts to an excuse-orama that would sound dodgy coming from a kid who broke a window. And here it is now coming from a nominee for President of the United States, the most demanding job in the world. I introduced the Presidential Tax Transparency Act after talking to my colleagues on the Finance Committee, Leader Reid, Senator Murphy, and others, back in May. It was my fervent hope then that that piece of legislation would not end up being necessary. I think we all feel we got plenty of laws. Certainly my colleagues on the Finance Committee know we got lots of tax laws. You know, who needs more of them? My hope was that the bill would hammer home the importance of the tradition that Leader Reid just talked about, that tradition of voluntary disclosure, and it might spark a good government gene in Mr. Trump, and he would disclose his returns voluntarily. No such luck. Right now, it is noon on Thursday. The debates start in 4 days. I just checked with Leader Reid, and it looks to me like the United States Senate is still in session. The Senate is still in session. And Leader McConnell could, after lunch, call up the Presidential Tax Transparency Act. My view is we'd have a short debate, and it would pass overwhelmingly. So it's never too late to work for transparency, good governance, and accountability. And so the push to pass this legislation is going to continue, and you're now going to hear from my Finance Committee colleagues.
Well, thank you very much for Senator Wyden for introducing this bill and for Senator Murphy joining in this effort and for Senator Reid's strong support. Senator Cardin and I here joining our colleagues, and we had hoped it would not be necessary, frankly, to do that because what has been said is that we have had 40 years of a common practice to require presidential candidates to release their returns. And why is it different now? You know, this is not a small issue. The commander-in-chief is an incredibly important job. This is the most powerful job in our country and probably in the world. And we have a right to know. The American people have a right to know how much a candidate is paying in taxes, what their tax rate is, what they give to charity, whether they're taking advantage of tax loopholes, whether they have ties to foreign governments. I mean, all of these are legitimate questions that Donald Trump has not answered. We don't know any of those basic questions because he refuses the basic standard of transparency that has been followed by every other candidate, Democrat or Republican. Hillary Clinton released her latest federal tax returns in August, and she has been making her federal tax return public since 1977. 1977. Her running mate, Tim Kaine, and his wife also released 10 years of their tax returns. He's hiding behind fake excuses, as my colleagues have said, backtracking on other promises. Obviously, his son's comments about how if they released his tax returns, we'd spend all of our time talking about them, and you would as well, I think is most telling that there must be a lot to talk about in those tax returns. You know, sometimes in watching this campaign, and certainly watching the Republican nominee, it reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. And it's time to pay attention to who's behind the curtain, who's operating the cranks and levers to create this illusion of power, and to find out. He's afraid of what we will see when we pull back the curtain. Relationships with Russia, financial dealings, illegal activities related to his charity and his business, as well as other efforts to make contributions to those who might bring legal actions against him. Or maybe he's just not the successful businessman that he's been saying he is. What is he afraid of? That's what I want to know. It's time to pull back the curtain to see. Senator Cardin.
Well, let me thank my colleagues. I particularly want to thank Senator Wyden for his leadership on this issue. I serve with Senator Wyden and Senator Stabenow on the Senate Finance Committee. And one of the critical issues in the next Congress is going to be dealing with the budget problems of our country. And there is general agreement among Democrats and Republicans and among the American people that we have a broken tax system that needs major reform. During this year, we in the committee broke down to working groups in order to try to understand better how to fix this broken tax system. And we're going to need the leadership of the next president in order to get that done. In making the evaluation, the American people need to know whether the next president of the United States has inherent conflicts in doing that work. And we know that Donald Trump will not release his tax returns. We can only surmise that he has used different provisions of the tax code in a way that may be controversial to the American public. They have a right to know that. They have the right to know how he's used tax avoidance schemes in order to avoid paying taxes. We also know we have significant international tax issues that have to be dealt with. We've seen a challenge by European Union as to how an American company pays its taxes. And we have challenges as to how we deal with the foreign tax issues. Donald Trump has multiple international business activities. How he's dealt with that in the tax code is very much going to be in play in the next Congress. The American people have a right to know what that relationship is all about when they decide whether they want Donald Trump to be in charge of tax reform in his administration in the next Congress. Fundamental issues. That's why we have disclosure laws. Now, I also serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee with Senator Murphy, and I appreciated his comments about Russia. But let me just drill down on that for one moment. We know that Russia has violated international law in what he's done in Ukraine. We know that Russia has violated international laws in what they're doing today in Syria, and now the apparent attack on the Red Cross. We know that Russia has been engaged in cyber attacks against the United States in what they've done in taking information from the Democratic Party institutions. We know all that. That requires action against Russia. The American people have a right to know whether Donald Trump's loyalty to our country is compromised because of his relationships with the oligarchs of Russia. We have a right to know that. And the only way you're going to know that is to see his tax returns. Now, I can tell you, I'm pretty outspoken when I travel around the world on good governance and corruption and disclosure and transparency. But I tell you, we're being questioned here in the United States as to whether our election system is transparent and open. Donald Trump must lead by example. He should have released his tax returns, and since he hasn't, it's incumbent upon the United States Congress to pass the Wyden bill, and I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of that legislation.
Thank you, Senator Cardin. I think we got time for a couple questions. Softballs for me, difficult ones for my friends. Yes.
Senator Wyden, why stop with tax returns? Why not also include medical records in the bill?
Well, first of all, I think there has been progress on the medical records front. Certainly Secretary Clinton has again stepped up to offer significant information about her medical records. This is a 40-year tradition. In other words, people often ask me, well, what about this? What about that? There are a whole host of areas we could debate. This is an area where there is a 40-year tradition since Watergate. This is the area where we said, look, you certainly could talk about disclosing all kinds of information. And as Senator Cardin and Senator Stabenow have said, we're going to have big debates next year in the Finance Committee with respect to taxes. So we can talk about all that. What concerns us is that this is a 40-year tradition. Everybody, liberal, conservative, has said, we're on board. This is something the American people are entitled to. And the reason why is that the tax return can't spin. The tax return offers figures in black and white. You can't just say, well, this is part of my campaign, and say, well, I'm going to talk about this or I'm going to talk about that. It is something that lays out in one place clearly what somebody's finances are all about. And Senator Cardin just mentioned another area that is particularly topical, and that's Russia.
If I just point out that one point, tax returns are a common requirement for all. It's the law of the land. We know exactly what you have to put on your tax returns. Everyone's subject to the same rules. Health issues, which are being disclosed and should be disclosed, are subject to evaluation and subjectivity in its conclusions. So they're different. But when you're dealing with a tax return, you are dealing with everyone complying with the same law, and the American people have a right to have that information. I also think they should have health information, and that information is being disclosed.
And if I might just add, he did talk to Dr. Oz, so I guess that. But to underscore, again, this goes to fundamentally whether there's illegal behavior, whether or not there's a lot of discussion in terms of his charities and income and other things that raise legal questions. There's a question of our national security. Given his positions with Russia, the fact that he has gone on Russian media to praise the Russian leader and attack the President of the United States and the free press in the United States raises questions about why he would do that. What is his financial motive to do that? So from a legal, from a national security standpoint, as well as basic right to know, the tax returns answer a lot of questions, and he doesn't seem to want to answer those questions.
One last point, and it was made by Senator Murphy. Senator Cardin and I were with Senator Murphy when we talked about this earlier. I think that back when the Congress moved to create the financial disclosures and, in effect, the system that applies for financial disclosure, if we had thought at that time that there would be a candidate that would break the 40-year tradition, I think we would have, in effect, just made it part of the financial disclosure regime, and it would be law today. We never anticipated anybody would take a position like that. I'm on the Intelligence Committee. We never anticipated that someone, for purposes of winning an election, that an American political candidate would appeal to foreign spies to help him win an American election. So there's a lot we never expected. But had we thought at the time that the presidential candidate would walk back this 40-year tradition, I think it would have been made part of the financial disclosure.
Yes.
In your efforts to push this legislation, have you tried to get it onto the CR?
We asked unanimous consent last week, and we could have probably done it with a time agreement in an hour or so. Suffice it to say, I just said that we have time today to do such a thing. In other words, we are going to be here today. Last time I looked, with those lights, the Senate is in session. I think the question of having a tax and a spending bill commingled is certainly a challenge, but there is no reason you could have an hour debate. You could have a consent agreement for an hour debate. I really wonder who's going to take the other side, because I've talked to a lot of Republicans. This will pass overwhelmingly, and we ought to do it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.